This is the Game Football podcast from The Times. Today we react to Manchester City's 5th Premier League title in 6 seasons. They've made it 3 in a row. That's after Nottingham Forest guaranteed their survival with victory over Arsenal. We'll discuss what makes Manchester City so good and whether their success is tinged because of the charges laid against them by the Premier League. This is The Game. Hello, welcome back to the Game Podcast. I am Hugh Wisencroft. It's a happy Monday morning, I have to say, despite the fact that Manchester City have won the Premier League title. That's what we're going to discuss first, alongside Alison Rudd, Tom Roddy and Gregor Robertson. Gregor's former club, Nottingham Forest, beating Arsenal at the City ground, securing their Premier League survival, but obviously crowning City as champions.
I tell you, it's almost verging on the comic, because you've got the team they were up against. It was a 2-horse race. They were up against Manchester City, who have Rumpelstiltskin levels of gold coins in their attic. And
this team, so
but ultimately, you can't fight. You can't fight Mega Dosh with an olive tree. You can't.
No, but I was like, you can't. So let's go to how City won it instead, shall we? The result at the City ground meant Manchester City lifted the Premier League title for a 3rd season in a row, which will delight everyone in this room, I'm sure. It was confirmed the day before their 1-0 win over Chelsea, so they were able to celebrate with their fans at the Etihad as they lifted the Premier League trophy. So how did they win it? I think lots of people pointed to the 3-2-4-1 formation. John Stones or whoever was right back stepping into the midfield. They've had 17 wins, 4 draws, no defeats since switching to those tactics. I'm going to come... I know Alison looks very ponderous at this point in time, so I will come to all of the non-football aspects of how City won the title very shortly, because I know that people want to scream money, etc., as soon as they hear that question. But purely in a football sense, how do you feel this title was won, Tom Roddy?
Well, I think it's more mental.
I made it a tough question by taking money out of it, didn't I?
I'm stumped. I think it's mainly the Guardiola effect. Not mainly, that's the wrong way of phrasing it, but there was that period. I mean, they've dropped 2 points, and this partly goes into the Arsenal's collapse, in inverted commas. They've dropped 2 points since February 6th. So I think the relentless pressure from City is partly why Arsenal have fallen down in the way they have and at the speed they have, because it was inevitable in a way. But Guardiola's mentality, I think Guardiola is the key. Yes, the amount of money they spend means they will always be a fixture at the top of the table because of the resources that they have. But I don't think they would have won 3 titles in a row without him. One of his many great achievements in English football is changing the way we think about football, and John Stones is the example of this season. Every season he has a different idea, and you hear people talk about now whether Trent Alexander-Arnold can play centre mid for England, and whether Phil Foden could, a while ago, whether he could be a false 9 at different times. I think that's a large amount of that is down to the way Guardiola changes the way we think about the game. So that will be part of his legacy when he eventually leaves. But there's also, I think, at City, speaking to a sporting director not so long ago who was explaining the way in which the relationship has changed at football clubs and at the majority of football clubs, and it's that every single day the coach has to convince the players that he's good enough now at most clubs. And at City, it's not really like that. I think it's one of the only clubs in the world where the coach is all-powerful, and he's shown his ruthlessness in a way with Cancelo going, with Zinchenko going, with Gabriel Jesus going. There is no one more powerful than him, and they all buy into what he does, what he thinks, what he wants to do. And that's a very intoxicating thing.
You're spot on. I think of it as a cult. It's a cult at City, the cult of Guardiola. And all the quotes, even when they're prancing around, dancing, and very happy to have won and having their little party, you get them talking about how much they love him. It's like some sort of fascist rally almost, that sense of... You imagine that the players have got a photograph of him above their bed, because he is the god for them. They believe they would be nothing without him.
Make the Premier League great again.
They sign for City, not because they want to play in Manchester or they have an affinity to the blue side of Manchester. It's because they want to play under Guardiola. That's the first thing. It's a project, and it's about him only taking on players that are prepared to buy into it, because if you sign for City under Pep, you will work harder than you've ever worked before, and you'll be asked to do things you've never been asked to do before, exactly as you say, Tom. But the players believe they will be the best version of themselves they could ever be. And for a certain type of player, I don't think it would suit everybody, but for some players, the idea that they've been told they're very good and they're worth money and they might have won stuff before, they might have been, in the case of Grealish, absolutely adored at his hometown club. But it's not enough when if you sign for Pep, you'll be revolutionised. You'll be completely different. And so it's like a Boy Scout outing. They're all buying into it. They want the badges. They wanted a bit of his magic. So if you buy into it, then when you get a case of they've won what looks like a fairly straightforward game, and then afterwards he'll tell them off, tell them they could have been better, that could destroy some teams, the idea that, hang on, we're all right, probably going to win the league, mate. What are you on about? The fact he's able to rip into them and ask for more, and they want to give it to him, that's why they've won the title, because that is a very compelling concoction and no one else has it. I mean, Jurgen Klopp is a manager who inspires and so on, but he tends towards the more avuncular side of things, whereas Pep, I think, creates a distance so that they love him, but they're scared of him at the same time in exactly the right amount. So everybody there at City, I think, who's played regularly, on the fringes, you could argue it doesn't work for everyone. Players that play most regularly, they are better today than they were 10 months ago, 2 years ago.
It's strange that you say that, because I actually know I can't reveal sources, unfortunately, but quite a few of the Manchester City squad don't have good relationships with Guardiola.
Yeah, relationship, but they
love him. They'll do anything that he asks them. But it's exactly what you're, in just enough measure. It's probably too much, but it's so much credit to him as a coach that even though some of them don't like him that much, they'll still do absolutely anything for him. It's almost quite far on each extreme.
I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but with Guardiola, there's an element of distance. He gets that right, the distance between. I think it's the key is the relationship.
For me,
that
they could
have.
like him.
Intensity as well.
They could like him. They could like him more. But I think actually one of the reasons that it's good for Guardiola is he has so many world-class talented players, whatever you want to call it, and he needs to treat so many of them like they're not. And that's the toughest bit of his job. So there's no point being close to them, because at some point you're going to have to, a lot is made about his ability to rotate and rest players throughout the course of the season. Like, he basically saved all of his best players throughout the middle part of the season off the back of the World Cup. We were asking him questions like, why is Walker on the bench? Why is De Bruyne on the bench? Silva? It was embarrassing. It was probably in the middle of the season, the same bench he had at the weekend at times. But I realised after the weekend that he doesn't just do it on a game-to-game basis. He does it on a season-to-season basis. Because Bernardo Silva wanted to leave in the summer because he barely played last season. He was a fringe player. He wasn't a fringe player. No one's a fringe player at City. You play enough games. The point is, he wasn't in the best 11, and obviously felt he was good enough to be in the best 11. This year, he's been absolutely integral. John Stones, I remember saying Chelsea should sign John Stones instead of Fofana because Stones never played. And I was like, you can get an England international for about 50 million. Why are you spending 80 million on... And suddenly Stones were all talking about him as the story of the season because he was on the fringe a lot. And those players have been traded now. Foden has gone on the bench more, and Laporte, who was playing so many matches, is now on the bench more. Like, he just does that season to season, because obviously you can't keep everyone happy when you've got that many good players. And obviously now Laporte wants to leave. So, I mean, every summer, someone who has a great reputation is going to want to leave that football club because they haven't played as much as they would have wanted to. And yet he still manages to balance it. And it obviously is the reward of the trophies, which you're basically guaranteed if you go to City. So you have to listen to what Guardiola says. But it is a difference to what any other club can do. You can say that only Guardiola can manage it, but ultimately no one else has that many good players. No one else needs to do it. Do you know what I mean? If everyone had 18 top players, then brilliant, but I don't think anyone else has ever needed to do what Guardiola's done. He's done it brilliantly, but I can't think of a squad that we've seen in Premier League football that is such an embarrassment of riches.
But I still think Arsenal would have won the title if it wasn't for Guardiola this year, even with that squad.
That's an interesting one, but I can't. In my mind, I'm like, but who would their manager have been if it wasn't Guardiola? Because
Martin Samuel kind of written about that today, saying that like the headline in the paper is Pep is proving that great managers dominate, not great clubs. And he kind of references Man United slide. I kind of fundamentally disagree with that premise. I think that he's talking about institutions not being the thing that brings success. I think that's false. I think Manchester City have created an extraordinary institution, but still, when there's certain individuals, and Sir Alex Ferguson was one, and we're seeing Pep Guardiola as another, who still can elevate the performance and world-class players, as we're talking about, to levels they didn't know were possible. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing, dominance on this level. So I think it's only at moments like this that we actually kind of pause, and because, as you say, we critique them throughout the season. We say, what is he doing leaving, De Bruyne on the bench for 6 weeks or whatever it is? And we do that. It's our job. But then at moments like this, you kind of got to sit back and go, we're watching before our eyes one of the finest coaches that the sport has ever seen. We have to appreciate that as well. Despite all we're going to talk about the money, we're going to talk about, and as I say, I fundamentally disagree with what Martin Samuel's saying. Institutions are really important, because there's so many examples now of clubs, like even smaller clubs like Brighton and Brentford, who create a structure and a football club that the head coach is kind of not the most important part of, but he's a kind of exception to that rule because he is special.
5 titles in 6 seasons for Manchester City. I had the question written down, kind of how good is this City team compared to the others, but I think we need to reflect on that larger, it's not the first time in English football someone's won 5 titles in 6 seasons, but Manchester City doing it in the way that they've done it over those 5 years, you have to ask, really, are they now in the great dynasties of English football?
I don't feel like it to me,
it's
because
strange,
it's not organic.
Strange.
And because we're going to come on to, God, how many drum rolls has this show had? We're going to come on to the...
You can do it now, but again, this is what I mean. It's like, fans will say, well, there's other clubs that had money, that I get it.
The team they played at the weekend, Chelsea. Henry pointed that out in his match report, like, Chelsea are a gleaming example of how money, it doesn't necessarily buy success. It might in time, but still, that's what I'm saying.
Well, they are, let's be honest, they're a glimmering example of how money can buy you success. I mean, it wasn't that long ago they were winning the Champions League, so, I mean, they've had a bad season, and their new owner's clearly going to be different to the old owners, but then they haven't yet changed to an example, I'm sorry, of a team that, despite having money, are a failure. Like, mate, they've won a lot very recently.
No, but they have also just spent an unprecedented amount of money in the space of a year and fallen to the bottom half of the table. So success doesn't naturally follow the spending of money. You still need those kind of human traits of, like, team spirit and leadership and all those things, and that's generally provided by an inspirational head coach.
This partly answers both sides. A little bit of, a large amount of the money, but I always look at the City team and think about who sort of symbolises who they are and what they are. And this year, John Stones, as you said, Hugh, the way in which he plays, the invention probably symbolises what the Guardiola's City team is. Haaland does in a way because of just the relentless prolificity of what he does, and then De Bruyne because of the technician he is and the way they play. Even this weekend watching them, I thought Calvin Phillips sums up City a bit. Mikel Arteta probably would have loved to have got Calvin Phillips in the summer, and he probably would have played for Arsenal the majority of the season. And at City, he can barely get a kick in the team. And he goes from being one of the best centre midfielders in the country to barely playing at all, because they've got such depth in that team because of the amount of money they can spend.
11 league titles in 14 seasons as a manager for Guardiola isn't bad at all. But I guess the most pertinent stat is the 115 alleged breaches of financial rules from the Premier League. It's likely to be in court for a number of years. Of course, City deny any wrongdoing. And I was going to say, how much does it tinge their success? But obviously, it's kind of been an undercurrent of all of our answers so far. So clearly, it's in the mind. The reaction's been interesting because fans, clearly, neutral fans, can't distance themselves from this now. Loads of conversations about almost how do you stop City? You know, what rules do we need to bring in? When's the independent regulator going to stop? You know, and of course, I think football fans generally, many of them see City as guilty. Of course, as I mentioned, they deny any wrongdoing. But I guess for everyone who doesn't support Manchester City, it kind of feels like hollow.
Well, I think the best, most recent piece I've read about this was from Owen Slot, who's chief sports writer of the Times. This was in Saturday's paper. Owen spent years reporting on rugby, and so he comes at football from a less impassioned point of view. He can look at it more clear-eyed than some of us, because he's not been in it his whole career. He sort of looks from the outside slightly, and he makes the point that if this all started, these are historical allegations of financial impropriety, right? So people saying, well, it doesn't matter, does it? Because now, what's happening now is beautiful. And he's saying, but you only build a team that can reach the heights that City have reached with money. And if we simply don't know what they did wrong, because they're not, City are hiding information rather than opening up their books. So we have the allegations, but we have no actual proof that those allegations are wrong. Just City's word for it, and everything else is tied up in legal stuff, red tape, and so on. And so he points out that the importance of Yaya Toure to being at City, sort of kick-starting this amazing dynasty, as you put it. You know, one of the allegations is that, you know, the Abu Dhabi United group made secret payments to his agent to make sure that he was happy and he stayed there. If that's true, they're illegal payments. Obviously, City deny it. But the headline is the greatest team or one built on years of cheating. So if you started with attracting a player to a club by spending money you're not allowed to spend on him, that then means you win something, which means you attract more players. And you only attract those players because of what Yaya Toure did, but you got him illegally. So and it snowballs, so that by doing things wrong in the past, you do have an effect on what's happening today, because you're not getting in players. We've discussed at length the cult of Guardiola, but it's also the knowledge that you'll win trophies because this is a club that isn't going to suddenly stop spending money. You're sort of guaranteed that there'll always be money there.
He also had a good reference point that was an excellent piece in about how if you're acquiring these players improperly, then still you have world-class players at your football club, and what that does to the kind of culture and the players who are perhaps not world-class, but they improve greatly because of the standards that are around them. So you watch Phil Foden coming through, surrounded by all these players. You referenced Nathan Ake this season, and kind of, or the development we often see after a year of doing nothing. In Guardiola's, the first season they arrive, they do very well, and then they work there with him for a year, and they work around world-class players. And he took that reference from a rugby sporting director. He said that who said that it's not necessarily just what's the standalone sort of accusations. It's what it does to the whole culture of the place in terms of raising standards. And
exactly,
that's only one of the 115 as well. So there's so many things that
you can't. The point is, you can't say, "Oh, it doesn't matter what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago." It doesn't matter. We should just look today at how wonderful City play. But actually, as you know, it does matter because they wouldn't be playing that well without having attracted the players they maybe wouldn't have attracted if they didn't spend more money than they should have.
And he also pointed out how the speed with which their revenue was inflated.
Yeah.
And clearly a lot of that was to do with sources of funding that came directly from...
And we might never know. This is the worrying thing. It might just be that this just all gets tied up with big lawyer fees, and we never find out one way or another. It's just always a stain.
We basically don't know how history will reflect upon Manchester City. Because who knows what happens in the whole sphere of financial fair play going forward too. It might be that it becomes obliterated. Paris Saint-Germain have basically destroyed it as well. So like, who knows what the future holds in terms of how you spend your money in football. So you still might come back to look at this 10 years down the line and say, everyone was doing it in City.
But here's the thing, we kind of do know what will happen. We already see, again, I should say for the posterity of the podcast, Manchester City deny any wrongdoing. We're kind of talking about how fans feel about it, generally how it's been received in the media as well, obviously, and how it's been written about and spoken about. But we may never know. Obviously, they had a UEFA case that went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which essentially cleared Manchester City, but did say some elements of it were time barred, other elements not proven. They did say, though, that they felt that City did not properly comply, if you like, with UEFA's investigation, didn't give them all the information that they requested, which I think for a lot of fans is the reason that they kind of... I think if that ruling had said City did absolutely everything that they could to prove their innocence and we find them innocent, people would have said... I think a lot more fans would have felt that they were innocent. This is, again, I'm talking about fan reaction. They are innocent. That is a fact. But I think how fans see it almost is that does tinge everything that Manchester City do. I do feel it's a strange thing that it's such a blessing to see a manager like that with a collection of players like that, to see football played like that. It's kind of a dream state of fantasy football that they have at Manchester City, and we might not see something like that again, that you kind of have to revel in it. And I always tell people that come to this country, if you get the chance to see Manchester City in the flesh, you'll probably get a ticket. Go ahead and see them at the Etihad. Well, there's usually tickets available, that's all I'm saying. Because... You're
such a tout.
Because... it is such a wonderful team, but it is unique. Like, you'll never see a squad. I don't know if we'll ever see a squad with that much talent in it ever again.
Well, there will always be caveats, and there will always be asterisks, whether that becomes an even bigger asterisk in the courts. But people do what we've done today in compartmentalising the quality of what you see in the pitch and what... The reason that is all there, the reason they've got to this stage. But on this side of things, one of the scenes this season that sadly might symbolise what Manchester City are, what they have been, was, I can't remember the game, I'm afraid, but it would be in January after the 115 breaches were announced, was that sign... that banner unfurled.
It was Aston Villa. I was there.
Panic on the streets of London with the Lord Panic, the KC, who, by the way, has been the KC for Boris Johnson, paid even more than a lot of the Manchester City players. That symbolises what City are as much as anything, and I don't think it is astonishing to see a banner like that.
That symbolises fandom, what fandom has become.
It's amazing.
I don't think you can say that symbolises City personally. I think that you could say that clearly supporters become sort of entrenched in their, and they're willing to ignore anything and sort of say that things are fake news and whatnot. That's the world we live in.
Everyone's against our team, biases and all that stuff.
So that was just bizarre.
But the one thing as well, I wonder, I've spoken a lot about Guardiola. We've spoken a lot about Guardiola, and I was thinking about when and what makes him leave. And the only thing I wonder is whether it is the breaches hanging over, rather than not winning the title or decided he's burnt out or anything like that. It's people saying that it's all tinged by it.
He's got the best job in football. There are zero footballing reasons for leaving Manchester City.
That's why I'm saying what makes him leave.
But yeah, he's always had this character of someone who is, morally in the right spot. He's always said that, again, he's always said City have told him the truth. You know, we've been, he said we get vilified or people have assumed that we're guilty. He's always said that kind of stuff in his press conference. I said on the podcast before, because one of the alleged breaches was payments. You know, he spoke about Yaya Touré's agent, but one of the alleged breaches was a secret payment to Roberto Mancini. When he was the manager, a side account in which he was paid part of his salary. And I always said, why hasn't Guardiola asked Mancini? Like, if he's just that, would he not tell him directly? I think they probably would have a good enough relationship for him to know some of these, again, and the likes of some of the players. There's a lot of individuals involved in this. And I find it weird that he's always like, I trust the club. It's like, but there are also 24 other people that you could have asked about this who might have given you some kind of personal indication you are Pep Guardiola as to whether these things were actually happening or not. He obviously feels that they haven't happened. So if he's been lied to, I can only imagine that would be the only reason that he leaves Manchester City. But yeah, look, the final question I wanted to ask on City, it clearly is for lots of people a kind of hollow thing. I think it's incredible for the City fans who probably, it's the thing is, it's such a weird juxtaposition because it's so recent that it's not even that they weren't a title winning side, that they were down the league. So you speak to their fans, how are you feeling about winning the Premier League title? And they're like, yeah, the other year we were playing Gillingham or, we in a playoff final, or we got beaten by Middlesbrough 8-1 on the final day of the season, and all they talk about all these negatives. And they're so recent and you think, wow, the club has changed so drastically. That the only thing I really wanted to ask is where they're headed next, where we think Manchester City will go. I don't see an independent regulator, by the way, reeling them in. I don't see FFP reeling them in because, again, this is the whole reason for soft power. The owners of and it's not just Manchester City, but state ownership in English football is probably with Manchester United about to get worse. And the amount of money that certain states bring into our country, football isn't worth it to the government, let's put it that way, to say, actually, do you know what, we think there should be stronger rules, or you shouldn't be able to spend more money, or this, that, the other. In fact, it's likely to go the other way. We're likely to see English football be the league in which you can do whatever you want. And that might be the thing that kind of stops the European Super League from happening in the future, that the Premier League becomes that.
I don't think we'll see that. I think we are going to see kind of these rules tightened, but I think...
So what do you think? We'll get the accounts every 3 months?
The thing is, the growth's already happened. Inflation's already happened. They're already entrenched. If this is where the point where you say, right, we're tightening the belts a bit here, lad. You can't spend anything you want. Manchester City have already become the richest club in the world. So
but then
that's the argument against FFP. But they've already joined the group. They've already joined the elite.
But they haven't. They haven't. I mean, they have on paper, but they haven't in reality.
Paper's what matters.
Because in reality, they're not a bigger brand than Real Madrid or Barcelona. As good as they are, they're not. They're not a bigger brand than Manchester United.
No, but the numbers tell you that
they've grown substantially.
Grown to basically the same size in terms of revenue. So it's already happened. They're already part of the elite now. It would take a punishment, of which we know, it's kind of looming, but a huge punishment for them to threaten their places among English and European football's elite. Because,
what does it mean? But it doesn't
mean. But as Martin Samuel said, without Guardiola, they would still be in the same situation as a lot of clubs.
I don't think so. I'm not saying that Guardiola is not a major reason why Manchester City are winning titles like they are. Of course he is. But if he was not their manager, the next best manager in the world would be their manager.
But he's not.
And they would still have. So they would still have the best squad in the world by some distance, in my opinion, and the ability to get whoever they want, and they would have the second best manager.
And then they become PSG, and they just become a laughingstock.
But no, the club is run so well. Ultimately, I've said this many times, having the money is one thing. I don't think Manchester City could have done much better in terms of what they've done with the money. The club has been run in an incredible way. Yes, okay, you've got all the money in the world to spend, but you could make so many mistakes.
But you said where next for City? And if Guardiola leaves, there is a possibility that they become like PSG, where they have stars who don't buy into the cult of the manager and therefore become spoiled and therefore underperform.
Yeah, everything becomes more uncertain without Guardiola. He's competing against some other head coaches who are the best in Europe, and we still see fluctuations. So, yeah, Manchester City are a well-oiled machine now, but Guardiola is the man, as we've just discussed, for a long time, who has elevated them to heights which is why we're seeing dominance, as opposed to the odd title in 5 years or whatever.
Treble incoming?
Oh, absolutely not.
You think
The other thing about reflecting upon this team is there going to be any jeopardy along the way?
What do you mean?
If they steamroller Man United and Inter Milan in the final, then people look back and go, part of the reason you look back at Manchester United's treble-winning team was because of the remarkable comebacks and the jeopardy and the feeling that they grabbed
But people will say
victory from the jaws of defeat.
It doesn't matter. People will say Manchester City were better. If you win the treble without breaking sweat, I mean, Man United definitely did. So people will say Manchester City were better, and it's not like they had an easy run of it. If they beat Inter Milan in the final, they beat.
Yeah, but I think it matters how it
Man United
happens.
in the FA Cup final.
I think it matters how it happens.
What, entertainment-wise, drama-wise?
Yeah.
What, so beating everyone 5-0 is not good enough to be the better team? You have to.
It's like AI versus human imagination, isn't it? That they will look like they've been programmed to win, as opposed to drawing upon things that are almost intangible, like spirit and heart and guts. And
Absolutely.
People will turn to the 45 minutes against Madrid, won't they, instead? That'll be what people will talk about. I know that's not jeopardy, it's quite the opposite. It's utter dominance. But
they caught Madrid as Madrid hit that point where they were suddenly very old and tired.
I think they've been brilliant football-wise, and time will tell how we'll reflect on this period, as you mentioned, with a court case that's likely to last 4 years regarding their 115 alleged breaches from the Premier League. Of course, I remind you, City deny any wrongdoing. They have not been proven to have done anything wrong. They are a completely innocent football club. They're the Premier League champions for the 5th time in 6 years. And congratulations to them, because the football has been scintillating and the tactics, the coaching is second to none. So it has been enjoyable. I've got to say, very quickly, for those that think this team is better, I don't think they're as good as last season. I'm just going to say that. That's a whole other conversation. But I did enjoy watching City, and I did feel like they were more dominant. They just didn't have Erling Haaland last season, and that's the difference for me. Anyway, lots still to discuss on the Game Podcast. Remember, if you're enjoying it, hit the notification button. We'll talk big results